Howdy of you delicious people, I'm here today to review E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. It's funny how a Steven Spielberg movie and we have so many Star Wars things that are in this film. We have Michael who ends up doing the Yoda impression, and going on and having Star Wars action figures in this film, and also the Yoda costume in the Halloween part of this film. For me, this has to be the first time fully watching this movie because I remember like the Halloween stuff till the end of the film, and I probably remember the shed part in the beginning of the movie, but anything other than that, just don't remember. So this has to be like the first time I think fully remembering seeing this movie. So I have proof. Uh, so in honesty, this movie is fun. I will probably always watch it if it's convenient, but I feel like it's a very slow film. I feel that really, to me, it's just like you're watching the film just for E.T. because it's like, man, I want to see E.T. do some cool stuff in this film because E.T.'s a pimp, but then anything other than that, it's just like, okay, this is just a lot of common, and then we get the government chiming in this movie, and then it gets interesting, but then the movie ends. So yeah, like, really, it's just like a very like slow slog of a film, but you probably don't have a number of other things without this movie existing. And so with that said, a drunken ET is a fun ET. Ouch, Elliot. So let's go on into a double five time. Or no, wait. Let's tee up this movie. What is it? What is ET about? For those of you that have never seen ET, because there's those people out there. They exist. Some people love this movie. It's their favorite film, and they're like, "Hey, how dare you grade this movie? Just be like a middle of the road kind of half." No, this is the greatest movie of all time. What are you talking about? And some people might go on and have a thing about ET where the first time they saw it, it scared them, so they never saw the movie again. Uh, or maybe they just don't like this movie, and I could probably understand that. Like, to me, you could probably compare ET a lot to the Tom Hanks Turner and Hooch movie. Like, it feels like a lot of similarities when you go and watch both of those films. With the exclusion of like Turner and Hooch being this investigation man and dog movie, where this is to be a kid and an alien eventually trying to just figure out how ET can get his ride. So, with that said, let's tee this movie up. So, we have a bunch of aliens who are to land upon this forest and start to take a number of plant samples, and all of a sudden it seems that there is to be the government that is to find this possible ship, and so the aliens scramble back into their ship, leaving one alien behind, and so that ends up being ET. ET is going into the forest, just kind of stuck in there, and then at some point he is to make his way to Elliot's home, where Elliot is bringing him into his room, and then slowly but surely start to introduce this alien to a number of his family members who will all kind of promise to, one way or the other, not be scared or afraid or whatever of this thing. So the further and further they go in here, they are to hopefully want to try and talk to Ichi, Et, and hope that he can understand what they're saying the more that they talk. So ET is to point, of course, to where his planet is and where home is. And so, come to find out, ET is to need to broadcast a signal to his ship to tell them to come back. And once he does go on and do that, the government is to roll in and quarantine both Elliot and the alien and start to try to figure things out. And then Elliot ends up with Michael tricking the government and tries to run off with ET to then send him home. It's basically the simplest way to explain most of this movie. But in spoilers, I'm going to go on and be a little bit more specific. Hopefully. Maybe. Let's go on. Because it's about that time to just go into that double five time territory. Because about that time to just say it's spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time you to spoil this movie. So, in the beginning of this film, kind of like I said, I don't know if ET's ship has a specific name besides UFO. Because I don't know how many times I would go on and think that, oh, this obviously doesn't have a name or like anything specific. And then I would just go through and then Google something afterwards. I'm like, oh, ET's ship was called FBRCDD1. And I'm like, okay. Why did that have a name? Why not just call it alien ship? Why not call it UFO? No, it has a name. Whatever. I don't know if like the signs aliens, if they had an actual name. I didn't look that up. Probably should have. So the alien ship lands on Earth into this forest. ET and all of his buddies start to get plant samples. And all of a sudden, the government with this truck is to roll in and have all these flashlights, and they're kind of like, hey, where is this alien ship? I don't know. Let's start looking. I don't know where it is. So, nobody's really talking in this sequence, but I just thought it would just be interesting to roll in some dialogue here. So, we have a number of these men that are all trying to go on and find these aliens, and once the truck rolls up, a lot of the aliens are to sense and have their bodies glow red to sense someone's coming. So most of the aliens all go into the ship with the exclusion of one, and they go off. And to me, it is kind of like the beginning of this kind of feels like Space Clowns from Outer Space, or Clowns from Outer Space, whatever movie that's called, because that alien ship ends up like landing like right in the middle of the forest, and then somehow or another it seems that bizarrely people start to continue to head to get to that ship, and I was like, man, that is such an odd thing. But anyways, check out Space Clowns or Clowns from Outer Space, whatever that is, whatever the title is. I don't quite remember. It's been a long time. It's been a while. Anyways, so we have ET that is stuck into the forest as these government guys are to try to continue to look around and kick around to hope that they can find something. So we now have to transition to Elliot and Michael and the rest of these guys going on and playing Tunnels and Trolls at their home, and never heard of this game until today. So I was like, come on, you've played so many D&D games. I've heard of them. I've went on and watched YouTube stuff of them. But never this one. So that was kind of interesting. So Elliot is to keep demanding to want to play this game, and Michael is to give Elliot busy work like going and getting this pizza that they ordered. And then they told him that they'll go on and kind of work him in the next round of things. We're in the next uh like time of things. So we have Mary going on and putting some of the dishes together, and one of the kids ends up trying to touch Mary's butt, and she's like, "Don't do that." So we have Elliot going on and getting the pizza, and by the time he tries to go in the house, he all of a sudden hears this sound, and he thinks that it's Harvey the dog. So Elliot goes to the backyard to throw a ball into the shed, and all of a sudden, oddly, the ball rolls back. Elliot is very like scared about this, so Elliot is to want to pull all of his family members to go out to the shed to check whatever this is. So they go on in to check out the shed and they don't see anything. Michael is to mention that it looks like cougar or mount or I think it's cougar uh, prints, and because I guess we don't have Google during this time period, so isn't it always the thing where in every like almost horror movie we have them go, oh, it must be a mountain lion or a cougar or a bear or it must have been a wolf. Yeah, I don't think so. So they go on and they think that nothing is in the shed, as we weirdly had all these kids just grab these knives. And I'm thinking, like, out of all the things that these kids could have grabbed, like a knife really doesn't seem like one of them. Like I would have found like some kind of like mop or something to just kind of like poke at this thing, because if anything, you would much rather have or want something that is to create distance rather than yeah, let's get this thing right next to this whatever it is. And then when I realized that like I did nothing to this thing, well, man, am I going to be dead? So we have them go back into the house and they realize that the pizza box is on the ground, and Elliot uh, had messed with it and ruined the pizza. So one of the kids still grabs a slice, but they're just like, Elliot, like, you klutz. So Elliot's like, I'm sorry. And so never again will Elliot get sponsored by Pizza Hut or any other pizza place that is to um, exist after this, it seems, because I say Pizza Hut, but I don't really think there's many Pizza Huts left. It's probably more like Little Caesars or Domino's really left now, right? So, anyways, so Elliot, so what Elliot goes on and does is he wants to hope that he can still see this thing, find out what it is, because he's more curious than the rest of his family. So, come to find out, E.T. was still in that shed, and he kind of puts his fingers on, or whatever the equivalent of alien fingers is, and is to go on and head out. So, Elliot at one point is to spot E.T., and when he spots E.T., he screams, and E.T. screams, and then Elliot runs away, and but he still wants to go on and uh, and check this thing out. So Elliot goes into the forest where E.T. was originally and is starting to put like a number of Reese's Pieces or just candies hoping that eventually Elliot could possibly track this thing back to his home. So Elliot all of a sudden sees one guy in the background who's just kind of kicking these trees or this grass around, and Elliot's like, okay, I don't know who that guy is. Probably some government guy who's thinking, I'm like, oh, that's the alien right there. Elliot's the alien. Get him. So Elliot goes back to his home, and so E.T. makes it back to Elliot's place. So Elliot is to stay in this lawn chair and kind of just sit out there and just kind of wait it out to see if the alien's going to come back. So the alien finally does come back, and like slowly but surely the alien just starts to like trot a little bit, it stops, trot a little bit, stops, and then he gets really close to Elliot, and then he drops into the candy right in front of him. So Elliot is to go on and be like, okay, like I'm gonna pull the James Woods trick here, and so Elliot goes on and keeps taking a bunch of this candy and is dropping it, um, to where ET continues to follow him, and like ET's like eating this. So Elliot goes on to figure out a way to get ET completely into his room, and then he ends up closing the door, and then he ends up like scratching his nose or scratching his head, and we have ET that mimics everything that this guy is doing, this kid is doing. And so Elliot's like, oh my god, like he's just copying what I'm doing. But come to find out, both E.T. and Elliot have this special connection where they feel the same things. So eventually that'll come into a factor when Elliot is to go to school and he's intoxicated. How dare you have a kid intoxicated in this film? Oh, you're sending a horrible message to the youth of America. Considering this movie is how old? So because Elliot wants to go on and take a whole day to figure out this alien, to try to figure out how to talk to it, or just uh, go on and just miss school. Elliot is to pretend that he's sick, putting this thermometer on this light and then putting it back into his mouth. So Mary is to check on that Elliot is sick. He's like, oh yeah, like you're definitely sick. So we have at one point Michael is uh, backing the car out of the driveway. So everybody's to kind of go on and get into the car and go on the merry way of going to school. So here's the odd thing: when Michael is to come home, he has like every bit of his like football equipment on, and I'm very confused. I'm like, does this guy not have a locker? There is only like one time that I ever actually had like all of my equipment on me, because a lot of the times they had a locker, but like maybe this is just a thing that like they didn't have lockers for these kids. Um, so I'm like, okay, like that's unique. So maybe he was doing an away game. I don't know. It is what it is. So the kids come home from school, and so after Elliot is to go on and trying to do things with E.T., but mostly keep him in this closet, we have Michael that needs to see this thing. And so Michael comes home wearing his football gear, And Elliot's telling Michael, hey, like, you gotta swear on everything. Like, remember about that goblin that I told you? And Michael's like, sure, yeah, whatever. So Elliot goes on is to show E.T. off to Michael, and Michael's like, oh my god, like, this is an alien. And then all of a sudden, we have Gertie that just walks in. It's like, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Oh, alien. Oh my god. I'm doing this and that. Oh my god. Ah. So Michael is grabbing Gertie, trying to quiet her as they're all going into the closet. And so when Mary comes home and is talking to Elliot, it's like, man, like, what happened to your room? Um, because Michael was to go on and smack into the shelving unit that was on his wall, and the shelves break, and Elliot's room is looking like a mess. And Mary is telling Elliot, it's like, well, hey, like what are you doing in this room? And Elliot's like, oh, I'm remodeling. Like, Mary's like, okay, all right, whatever you want to do, like, faker. No, Michael ends up calling Elliot a faker, but still. So when Elliot goes back into the closet, Elliot tells Gertie again, like, you need to swear on everything that you're not going to tell mom about this alien. It's only for kids to know, and that's it. And so Michael is to use the added extra thing to tell Gertie if she doesn't go on and keep this secret. And so Michael grabs her stuffed thing, her stuffed toy, let's just say, and is to start to, like, pull at it and whatever. And so Gertie's like, no, don't stop. So they're like, okay, so you're gonna keep this secret. So she's like, okay. So and then E.T. is just kind of looking on. He's like, all right, I'm gonna be hanging out in this closet for the rest of this movie at this point for a good while. So we had Elliot that on his sick day was to show E.T. a bunch of things. He was to show him some Star Wars action figures. He was to show him a car, and E.T. tries to eat the little toy car. And Elliot's like, oh, you need food. Like, yeah, like, I'm going to go and get some food. And so Elliot goes off and gets food. E.T. accidentally opens his umbrella and it scares him. And Elliot is scared while being in the refrigerator because they sense the same things. So Elliot drops the milk and then is to go and give both him and E.T. some food. So that seems to be like the very most like eventful thing that Elliot does on his sick day, supposedly. So we also had a moment where when Elliot was to talk about no one in the family believes that he saw a goblin, and Mary is to go on uh, and talk to Elliot about this. Elliot is to say that his father would probably believe him, and Mary's saying to Elliot, it's like, oh, like, why don't you call, like, your father? And Elliot's like, well, I can't because he's in Mexico with Sally. And all of a sudden Mary is to just kind of storm off and look away. And so we have Michael that's telling Elliot, it's like, well, can't you go up? Can't you, like, consider other people's feelings? So on and so forth. So Mary is to mention something about hating Mexico or something like that, and she storms off. So, and there's quite a bit of times where they go on and they talk about uh, uh, Mary's husband in Mexico. Eh, my dad's in Mexico. Sure he is. So then Elliot the next day is to go off to school, and Michael is asking Elliot, it's like, well, hey, do you think the alien knows, like, you're going off to school? Do you think he knows what school is? And Elliot's like, I don't know. Like, let's just go off to school and we'll worry about it, like, later on. So I think we also had a moment with Elliot, Michael, and Gertie where they were trying to get some dialogue going with ET, and they were showing him images of Earth and where they live as far as a state, and like they were to kind of show him like the solar system, and they were trying to ask him, it's like, well, hey, like this is our home, like where's your home? And ET is just to kind of point outside and be like home. So, but I still think at this point that he can't really like speak yet. It takes him a while for him to like watch TV and get drunk and then learn English. So we we go on in this film, and Elliot goes off to school, and E.T. decides that he's going to get out of Elliot's room and start to explore. That's, of course, when E.T. is to get drunk, is to watch some telly, some TV, and so Elliot's going off to school, and when E.T. ends up getting drunk, Elliot ends up getting drunk. And Elliot is starting to look at this girl who is just to be called the pretty girl in this movie. But her real name is actually Erica. I'm like, man, like, it's really cool because to not only see the guy who's played, like, Tyler in this movie, who's C. Thomas Howell, I've also seen Erica in a number of things also. Case in point, like the Beverly Hillbillies live action movie. Not exactly the best thing to say that she was in, but like she was in a lot of stuff. There's this one movie that she ended up doing where she was like a naval prisoner, where that movie is actually pretty interesting. The movie that Erica did, I think it was like Chasing Something. I don't remember. It's been a long time. But I would probably recommend that to people, just because there is, of course, a Cena 2, if you know what I mean. But anyways, so with that said, pushing on. So, but going back to it, Elliot goes and is to get drunk, and his look at this girl is like, and she's like, okay, whatever he's looking at. So, I guess today in class they are going and dissecting frogs. So Elliot, as well as a number of other classmates, are to all go on and go to these tables where they're to get these little cotton balls that have, like, I guess, a chloroform or something like that in them, and then kind of seal these jars. And Elliot decides to go on and want to free all of these frogs out of these jars, as Elliot is all of a sudden look at one and ask it to talk. So Elliot frees all of the frogs out of the jars and tells everyone to do the same. So they do. And then we have this very odd occurrence where everybody's like running around like crazy. All these frogs are jumping all over the place. We have Elliot that all of a sudden is to now be recreating some scene from some movie somewhere that E.T. is watching. So Elliot is to go on and grab Erica's character, just called the Pretty Girl, and kiss her, but he needs a boost from this one kid. So the kid conveniently falls over, and it's to slide a little bit for then Elliot to to walk over him and then kiss this girl. End scene. So Mary and Gertie are to be home, and so E.T. is in the living room, drunk. Gertie is to tell Mary that, of course, Gertie wants Mary to meet someone, and Mary's too busy putting all these groceries away to even realize that E.T. is just kind of walking around everywhere. And so we have Mary that doesn't even realize E.T. is even in the house. We have it at one point where finally E.T. is to say B, and Gertie's like, oh my god, he said a word. He said B. And Gertie says good. And so all of a sudden, E.T. says, be good. And so all of a sudden she's like, oh my god, you said a technically sentence. So Gertie then goes on and is to bring Elliot back into her room, back in the closet, and just starts to put all these like costume things all over him. And so finally, when Elliot comes home after being drunk in school and ends up getting in trouble, Elliot and Michael all come home to realize that that Gertie had gone on and put this this kind of weird clothes all over E.T. And so E.T. eventually is to take the wig off, but E.T. is to tell Elliot that he is to kind of want to try to figure out how E.T. could tell Elliot and Michael that he wants to phone home. Having Gertie tell E.T. about this phone to call out, and so E.T. is like, okay, phone, phone, and it's like, well, what do you want to do? And he's pointing at this picture, and so they're like, well, do you want to phone home? Do you want to phone your people? And he's like, E.T. phone home. As well as we have Elliot, who figures out that he should call E.T. E.T. because when Elliot is talking with the guys at this bus stop, they kind of rib him for saying well, hey, did you ever see that goblin? And Elliot's like, well, yeah, I did, and he's a spaceman. And so Elliot then is to go on and draw a picture of E.T. in school and draws it and says E.T. on it. And then the teacher's looking at that, and he's flips the paper over. So E.T. is to get E.T. because of the kids at the bus stop. So Elliot, I think this is right around the time that we're now getting to Halloween. So we have E.T. that is starting to get a number of pieces and random parts together, and is to try to figure out how he can signal home. So he's grabbing a number of random items throughout this house, and Michael and Elliot are realizing what E.T. is possibly doing. So as well as ET was to have gone on and used those circles to like go round and round in rotation to show like a possible solar system on his planet. So we have ET once he starts to get these parts together. This umbrella and a number of other things. He's starting to make these items float, so that way he can start putting things together. So at one point we start having the government that is trying to surveillance a bunch of these homes to find out if any of them are to have possibly seen or spotted this alien, and it seems that they're coming closer and closer to figuring things out. So we have at one point where Elliot is to take ET on this bike ride. And so when they do that, it seems that Elliot and ET take off, and that's where we see like kind of the moon signal that is to, of course, be used in the poster. And the funny thing is Elliot is like, "Oh God, I hope that we don't crash." And of course, that's the one thing that they end up doing once the bike lands. So that is like the first run of them going on and trying to do this. But in the future, they'll of course go on with a number of kids to do this again, and that's how the movie eventually is to kind of come to a close. But we'll get there in a minute here, or in a couple minutes. So we now have this be Halloween at this point. So Gertie is supposed to be dressing up as a cowgirl, and instead she's going to be a ghost. So, because E.T. is a ghost, so like Gertie is supposed to be E.T. So that way they can try to sneak E.T. out of the house. So Mary goes on and is to see her kids dress in costume. And I guess Michael is supposed to be a terrorist, I think. Because what else could he really be? That's what she says that I guess that he is in this movie, and they're like arguing about it. So Mary goes on and is to take pictures of all three of them, and it's E.T. And E.T. notices that Michael has this kind of knife in his head, and he's like, ouch. Michael's like, no, it's fine, it's fake. So they go on, and Michael is telling Elliot that eventually they're going to go trick-or-treating for a while, and so Elliot has like a small window to go out to this forest and hope that E.T. can signal his ship and then go home. So what happens is Michael and Gertie go out trick-or-treating, and Elliot goes with E.T. to go back into the forest. And so Elliot and E.T. end up getting sick in the forest because they waited so long for the aliens to come with their ship. And so E.T. signals. So both of them get sick, and so when finally Michael and Gertie come home and Mary's realizing that she's down a kid, she all of a sudden is calling the police. She's terrified, like, oh my God, my son is missing. Where could he be? So Elliot comes home the next day because I guess they had fallen asleep waiting. And so Elliot makes it back home. I guess he's sick again. So they're taking care of him. And so, come to find out, Elliot is to tell Michael that Michael needs to go and find E.T. because E.T. is sick also. So, by the time that Michael runs off to try and get this blanket to try to like grab ET, all of a sudden that's when the government gets involved and is spotting Michael with this alien. Michael's trying to hide the fact that he's grabbing this alien, and so that's when the government is to follow what's going on, and then is to quarantine this house off and have a bunch of like astronaut looking guys come in there. And because I guess there isn't like a bunch of guys that just have hazmat suits, they're just wearing like astronaut gear coming into this house and going and trying to like corner these people as Mary is screaming to all of them like, "This is my house, get out of my house." So the government steps in and is being all these hazmat suits and all this equipment. So the guys are starting to ask all the family all these questions. Having one of the hazmat guys asking Michael about certain questions about E.T. and Elliot combined. So Michael is to mention that Elliot and E.T. feel the same things. And so he's like, oh, okay, like, all right, so, like, are they talking to one another? And no, it's like, they just feel. That's how they have the connection. And they're like, oh, okay. So they have Elliot and E.T. just kind of quarantined off into this room together, and they have all these kind of suction things and all this stuff kind of put onto them. So they're checking E.T.'s DNA, and come to find out, like, E.T.'s DNA is way more complex than a normal human, but they figure out the sequencing or the way it is. So they're trying to figure out, like, how the alien is really sick, and Elliot is telling them, like, E.T.'s dying, like, leave him alone. And so we have moments where, like, the plant that E.T. is to see is to be dead, but E.T. brings it back to life. And then Michael is to go on and see the plant and see that it's, like, perfectly fine, and then it shrivels up and dies. And Michael's like, oh no, something's gonna happen to E.T. So we have Keyes that is talking to Elliot, and Keyes is mentioning to Elliot that he's so happy that this kid was to see this alien, because Keyes himself has always ever wanted this moment since he was 10 years old. And so, like, Keyes is mentioning to Elliot that Elliot was the right kid to have gone on and found this alien, and he's so happy that this had happened. So Keyes is trying to ask Elliot questions, even though Elliot is kind of struggling to talk at this point. So all of a sudden we start to have E.T. that is getting more and more worse in health, to the point of him finally, it seems, dying. So Elliot is now to be pulled away from E.T. because Elliot is now be very upset and saying, like, you're killing him. And so Elliot is trying to rip off all of his things to try to get close to E.T. to pull everyone away. And so they have to separate Elliot from E.T. And so they're defibrillating E.T. They're trying to figure out a way to bring E.T. back. And so it seems that E.T. dies. And Elliot seems to be in a better health condition than he was. So, because I guess the sync between the two is severed now. So, E.T. is to assume to be dead. And so they end up going and finding this little thing to seal ET into this little like it looks like a little like refrigerator with like a glass uh, window in it. So they give Elliot time to mourn ET's loss, and they leave him alone. And so, come to find out, ET is not dead. Like, he is to just be like, Elliot, nah, smacking. And so Elliot's like, oh my god, he's alive. He is alive. So, and also, like, the plant who is dead comes back to life. And so, we have Elliot that is to try to get E.T. to be quiet, but E.T. doesn't know how to be quiet. So, Elliot is to seal back that thing up, and Keys is to come back and say, like, Elliot, like, we need to take this now. And so Elliot's crying, they pull him away from it. So Elliot runs to Michael and explains to E.T. explains that E.T. is still alive. Michael smacks his his body by jumping too high. And he's like, oh my god, I hurt my head. So, and I thought that was so funny in this movie. The simple things. So, Elliot comes up with a plan and Michael's game. So, they take E.T. and put it in a van. And so, Elliot is to rush to get in this van and have Michael pull away. And certain agents are like, hey, what's going on with this kid in this car? What's going on here? So, Elliot is like realizing that they need to leave here. Michael's like, oh my god, like this agent's here. What should I do? And Elliot's like, get out of here, like drive away. So they pull away with this whole like hazmated kind of thing with it, with a bunch of like hazmat guys. And so Elliot realizes that he can kind of pull this these metal parts to separate the hazmat guys from this van. So he pulls all of this and separates it. So they continue to drive off with this van. But Michael is telling Greg, Steve, and Tyler to meet them at this certain playground. So, with these bikes. So, they go on, they leave the van, and the agents find the van, and they're like, oh, there's no alien in here, there's nothing in here. Mary is looking in the back. So, we had Mary and Gertie that was leaving with this plant, and Keys felt that was very suspicious because Gertie, I guess, was to give a note from Elliot to Mary telling them what they're doing, and so Keys is like, we gotta follow this girl. Like, there's something here. It's something suspicious. So they have the kids with all these bikes kind of dirt biking their way through all of these environments to have them be trying to outrun the cops here. So the cops try to go on and create these roadblocks, try to do all the things to stop all these kids on these bikes, try to chase after them on foot, and all the kids are like, oh my god, like these cops are everywhere, oh my god. Or all these special agents with all these suits. So what finally happens is E.T. is to take every kid on the bike and have them start flying in the air And so now we have all these kids that are flying in the air, and we have the one kid who's like, "Oh, just tell me when it's over." The one kid who's, I think it's Greg, or maybe it's Steve. So we also have C. Thomas Howell, that is Tyler, who has his like blue ski mask on. He's the ski mask guy. I don't know how many movies that I've seen him in, but I always really enjoy him. Um, like I wanted to eventually at some point check out The Hitchhiker, and a number of other movies that he's probably in. So maybe at one point I'll have that reviewed. Maybe sometime soon in a theater near you. So, or The Hitcher? Maybe it's not The Hitchhiker, it's The Hitcher? Yeah, I said that wrong. So, they're flying, and then they eventually go on and land. And so, E.T. is to know that his ship is going to come in, and because E.T. senses it. So, now they're just kind of going back into the forest, just kind of waiting for the ship to land, and it does. So now we have to go on and have all the tearful goodbyes, and we have Gertie that is to give E.T. this plant, and so E.T.'s going to take the plant with him. So we had Elliot that was when he was sick, and with E.T. who was also sick. We had Elliot that was telling E.T. it's like, I'm going to be right here. And so when Elliot and E.T. have their tearful goodbye, and E.T. is realizing that Elliot is crying, he's like, ouch. And Elliot's like, no, there's nothing you can do with that. Like, it's just, I'm sad. So E.T. then goes and tells Elliot, like, I will be right here. And so we also have Michael that is kind of like touch the alien, and like the alien's like, no, that's nice. So the alien is to almost leave, and then we have Harvey the dog who like goes up to the ship and then backpedals back. And I was like, what is that? Is that was that supposed to happen, or like was that a mistake and they just kept it in? What, huh? So, uh, so yeah, Elliot is like holding on to Harvey as the ship is taking off. So, so yeah, like Elliot leaves, everybody goes back to normal, and you would have thought at some point that Keys would have probably ended up with Mary, and that's how the movie just ends. But I guess, man, would I guess be wrong? So with that said, I think that wraps up most of this movie. Trying to wrap this up fairly quickly. Hopefully, I covered most of this movie. If anything, there might have been moments where, like, I quickly forgot about some of this stuff. But other than that, I think most of this movie was covered. Question mark? Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I forgot. I'm sure that there probably is. Let me know how you felt about E.T. in any way possible. Other than that, I think I'm good to call it a day for this one. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Oops.